at visibility modifiers and accessor or mutator methods. So by default, the class, variable or method can be accessed by any class in the same package. So we have seen this public modifier before our main method. So now we will see what this modifier does. So when we assign this public modifier in front of a class or data or method, that data, class or method then is visible to any class in any package. But when we use this private modifier in front of any data or methods, not a class. Please note, we cannot declare a class as private. We can only declare a data or method as private. And when we declare a data or method as private, it means that data or that method can be accessed only in that particular class, not outside that class. And if we want to access some private data, we can have a public get method or public set method to read that data or to modify that private property. But not we can directly access the data, a private data. Instead, we can have a public method get data or public method set data to read or write that particular field. So let's look at an example. Inside our package P1, we have two classes. One is class C1, another is class C2. And in a separate package P2, we have another class C3. So in our C1 class, we have three data fields. One is public, another is nothing written. Nothing written is called as default modifier. Like public and private, a default modifier, any data or method that is described as default, can be accessed only inside the same package. So Y is a default data and Z is a private field. Similarly, we have three methods. M1 is public, M2 is nothing there, so default, and M3 is private. So inside our C2 class, which is in the same package as P1, so inside the C2 class, we are creating an object from C1. So we can have this O.x. If we want to access O.x, the question is, can we access the X data of object O? So X is defined to be public. So X can be assigned from anywhere, from same package, from different package, from same class, from different classes, everywhere. So if we want to access O.x, we can access it. Then if we want to try to access O.y, Y has default modifier. That means it can be accessed from the same package. And since class C2 is inside the same package P1, so from C2 we can access O.y. O, remember, O is an object of C1 class. But if we want to access O.z, Z was private, so we cannot access Z outside of C1 class. And since C2 is a different class outside of C1, we cannot access O.z from C2 class. This is the same for the methods. So M1 was public, so we can call or invoke O.m1. M2 was default. So since C2 is in the same package, we can invoke O.m2. But M3 was a private method, so we cannot invoke O.m3 from a separate class. Now let's look at the class C3, which is in a different package. So inside the class C3, we can create an object of class C1, and we can create class C1 object because C1 was defined as public. So C1 can be accessed from a different package as well. After we create an object of C1, we can access the X data field because X was public, so it can be accessed from different package as well. But when we want to access Y, Y was default. Default means it cannot be accessed from a separate package. So since C3 is in a different package, we cannot access O.Y, and Z was private, so definitely we cannot access O.Z. For the methods, since M1 was public, we can invoke O.M1 from a different class inside different package, but we cannot invoke O.M2 because M2 was default, so we cannot invoke it from a different package, and we cannot also invoke O.M3 because M3 was private. We cannot invoke it outside the class C1. So that means an object, even an object of its type, cannot access its own private members from a different class. So here in this example, we are creating an object of type foo, where X and convert, these are some private data field and private method of the foo class. Here the foo class is here, where X is a boolean type but private, and convert is a method that returns integer but the type is also private. So this was inside the class foo. From the class test, which is a separate class, we are creating an object of type foo. Even if foo is its own type, it cannot access its X attribute because this is from a separate class named test, and X was a private field. Similarly, convert was a private method. So from a separate class test, foo cannot even call its own method convert. But when the main method is inside its own class foo, here we are again creating another object foo. From this method, main method, foo can call is X attribute because this main method is inside the same class foo. And this convert method, we can also invoke this because this convert method is invoked from the same class foo. So why data fields should be private? In order to protect data and to make class easy to maintain. That means a developer or programmer can decide which data field should be read by the user, or which data field should be written by the user and which data field should not be. So this is known as encapsulation, which is a primary one of the primary pillars of object-oriented programming. So in encapsulation, what does it mean? It comes from the term capsule. So the capsule for a medication, it means the actual medicine is inside a capsule, a separate thing that protects the actual medicine from the outside environment. So the state or the data fields of each object is defined as private, just like putting things inside a capsule to control access to them. And other objects can only call a list of public method of this object. If it's private, other objects from separate classes cannot call them. So in this way, the developer or programmer controls access to each of the data fields of the object. That means he or she can control which data field can have only read access, which data field can have only write access, or both access, or no access at all. This is known as encapsulation. So by default or by convention, whenever we create our own class, circle or any other, by default we will actually make all our data fields as private. So inside the UML diagram, how do we depict anything as private? So we will put this minus sign in front of a data field or methods to depict as private. Similarly, to show anything to be public, we will put a plus symbol in front of it. If we do not put any symbols, that means that's default modifier. So by default, I tell you again. So by convention, we will make all the data fields private. Then we will actually have this get radius, get number of object, that means the getter methods, and the set radius and the setter methods to give access to read and write of some particular data field, and the getter setter method will be public. Otherwise, other objects cannot access them.